You're listening to the Devil Dog Talk Show.
This show contains explicit material and is recommended for ages 18 and older for mature audiences only. But hey, it's the internet.
All right, so today we have Stephen London calling in from long distance, and we're going to be discussing a little bit about the Richard Starr Act. Did I get that right? It's the Richard Starr Act?
Yes, it's called the Major Richard Starr Act.
Major Richard Starr Act. Okay, so missed one key word there, Major Richard Starr Act, and he's going to be enlightening us a little bit more about the details. So welcome, Stephen, to the Devil Dog Talk Show. Thank you for calling in this morning. I don't know what time it is over there, but I really appreciate your time. And if we could go ahead and roll on into it, a little bit of an introduction of yourself for our listeners.
Sure. Thanks. Glad to participate in the show. It's about 7 p.m. over here, so as you guys are starting over there, I'm kind of sunsetting over here. But yeah, a little bit about myself. So my name is Stephen. I'm an Army veteran. I served almost 10 years before I was medically retired from the service. And after leaving service, I returned to academia, and I've been an advocate for the Major Richard Starr Act since it was originally introduced in the 116th Congress.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so about 3 years or so.
Okay. I'm so happy that you brought up that, because I was like 116th. What year are we talking about? You know, I'm not too familiar on how many times those guys meet up and do things and ladies and whatnot, but that's pretty amazing. So after your military service, you went back to academia. What field in particular, if you don't mind me asking?
What field I study?
Yeah.
So I studied international relations and politics, and I studied diplomacy.
Oh, wow.
So I finished that up, and then I finished a master's in writing. So, yeah.
Awesome.
Try to get a well-rounded education.
Yeah, no, that's some really good assets there for sure, because, you know, incorporating those two kind of conversation points, especially with an act in Congress, you would be able to explain it a lot better, actually, because I don't know how. I mean, besides, you know, back in the day, the Schoolhouse Rock, you know, how a bill becomes a law. You know, that's about the basis of my understanding. But so for you, how did you get involved in advocating for the Major Richard Starr Act?
So originally, when the Major Richard Starr Act was introduced in the 116th Congress, so I think just about 3 years ago or so, someone had brought the legislation to my attention, and they told me, hey, you want to take a look at this? I think this might be something you might be able to help advocate for. It's legislation that's designed to help out a good portion of veterans. And so I took a look at it. As far as legislation goes, it's kind of straightforward generally. And yeah, that's kind of how I got involved. And it's been a process ever since.
Wow. Now, what are the steps to getting the Major Richard Starr Act approved and pushed through Congress? Or where is it at, I should say, in the process of being approved?
Okay. Yeah. So I can kind of answer both of those. So I can start with where the Major Richard Starr Act is currently. Currently in Congress, so you have both chambers of Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate. When a bill starts out, all the way to the point of its passage, usually there's two versions of the bill, a Senate version and a House version. So the House version, it's H.R. 1282. That's what it's known as. And the Senate version is Senate 344 or S344. Currently, the bill is the number one most co-sponsored piece of legislation in the House. It has 301 co-sponsors in the House, and on the Senate side, its companion bill there, let's say, has 63 senators who have already signed on for support. And then to answer the next part of your question there, where does it go from here, or how does it get passed? There's a few different options. So a traditional route that a bill takes, kind of like the bill on Capitol Hill from Schoolhouse Rock, typically a bill will be assigned to a committee or committees responsible for that area or topic of legislation. And the chair of a committee that has a bill, once the committee has discussed it, a chair can take that legislation and present it to the floor of the respective chamber of Congress, so whether it's the House or the Senate. Once it goes to the floor, it's up for debate and voting. So this could be where amendments or maybe language is changed, or other lawmakers can ask their questions. Once it passes one of the chambers of Congress, either the House or the Senate, then it goes to the other chamber for them to pretty much do the same thing. And then once both the House and the Senate have agreed to a piece of legislation with identical language in it, then it can be presented to the president, and the president has the option to either sign legislation into law or veto it. So that's kind of the traditional route that the Major Richard Starr Act could take.
Wow. That's very interesting, because I didn't know that it has to pass through so many different kind of goalposts, so to speak. And when I was kind of reading up on it, I'm a little bit aloof on how the process is in implementation, but also what does the Major Richard Starr Act do?
Okay, yeah. So what the Major Richard Starr Act does, to try to simply explain it, there's something that's called concurrent receipt, and concurrent receipt, it's a law, let's say, that allows veterans to be able to receive their Veterans Affairs disability pay and their earned military retirement pay at the same time or concurrently. As far as concurrent receipt today, it's only available to military retirees with 20 years or more of credible service. And what the Major Richard Starr Act does, or what it would do, it opens up concurrent receipt for veterans who were medically retired due to combat injuries or combat-related injuries prior to reaching their full career or 20 plus years of service.
Okay, now you brought up concurrency. How does concurrency really work? I remember when I was getting out that I could sell back a certain amount of days, but then that monies made back from my leave days would be added to or reduced by the VA benefits. So I'm not too familiar on how, of course, medical military retirement works, but I'm a little bit understanding on that not everybody gets everything, and or there's a lot of complication on how somebody would receive full entitlement. Excuse me. But how does concurrency work? It sounds like it's working negatively towards the medically retired combat injured persons. And it kind of doesn't sit right. It kind of sounds like that should already be taken care of. Like I already have a few friends that are, Purple Heart recipients, and they're also medically retired. A handful of them, of course, completed their 20 years. So I don't know if they have concurrency or not, but that's a very interesting point on what is it, this concurrency, and how does it break down? Could you explain that a little bit better for us?
Yeah, I can try to explain what concurrent receipt is. So concurrent receipt, a simple way to explain it, you can think of it as being able to receive two of your earned benefits at the same time. So there's a lot of different programs, let's say, that are out there when a service member transitions to becoming a veteran. So there's retirement pay, there's Veterans Affairs disability pay for injuries. There's even a program called Combat Related Special Compensation, or CRSC. And what concurrent receipt does, what it allows a veteran to receive either their VA disability pay plus their earned retirement, or they can choose to receive their VA disability pay plus their CRSC pay. And what the Major Richard Starr Act would do, it would open up this process to those veterans whose careers, no fault of their own, but whose careers were cut short.
Wow. That's very important too, because I know a lot of people out there that were either medical separated or medically retired. I understand those are two different. They're two different, completely categorically. They're different, right? So for myself, I was med separated, but I was hardship transferred, and the way I understood it was, I could have gone for review through Med Board and gone through the appropriate medical retirement processes. However, I didn't have the knowledge at the time, nor the advocacy or support to go through something like that. Because from what I hear, it's not easy on the people that go through that. And for one, it's something that it may be forced or it may be necessary, depending on the person's injuries, right? But that's one of the things that I really find interesting in these conversations that I have with people that have a little bit more of their nose in the book or ear to the ground, so to speak, on different ways to improve the outcomes for these people that have committed their lives to service and have either, significant combat related injuries or had to be medically retired for other significant things. Does the Major Richard Starr Act supplement anything that the individuals haven't earned, so to speak? So in my eyes, I'm thinking budgetary, right? Everybody's talking about budget cuts right now. 22%. That's what everybody keeps saying. Veterans benefits are going to be cut by 22%. And I'm like, well, that's not how budget cuts work. You don't cut specific programmings 100% at what you need to move around and shift around to be good on the books, right? And does this add any budgetary expenses? Because it doesn't sound like it would, because the personnel are already recognized to be retired. And I'm not saying that the money's not allocated, but it's kind of, when you're saying you can't have these two concurrent paychecks, so to speak, simply because of bureaucracy. If you did the 20 years, then there's no rigmarole, there's no rinse and wash and repeat, there's no these points deduct from these points via payment. Does that kind of clear the mud up when these budget reviews go up? Because this is the only kind of concern I have right now, especially for something for veterans, because a lot of people may feel as though veterans already get enough, right? Or they get too much. That's a lot of opinions that I've heard, that I've had to educate, not just on retirement or VA benefits for compensation due to injury, but even simpler things like the GI Bill. A lot of people assume the GI Bill is this just free money, given willy-nilly to every service member that comes in and out of the military. And so breaking down the Major Richard Starr Act, how does this actually change current bureaucratical processes for these people to be recognized both as medically retired due to significant combat injuries? And does that affect their long-term VA benefits? Or how does that break down, if you could enlighten me a bit?
Okay. Yeah, I'll try to break all of that into information pieces, so to speak. The veterans who would be affected by the Major Richard Starr Act, these are veterans who are medically retired, they have combat-related injuries, and they've served less than 20 years of creditable service, military service. So when we talk about their medical retirement, that is something that they have earned because, through service, through their injuries incurred through service. When we talk about their VA disability pay, that's a benefit, let's say, that is supposed to, help supplement future earnings. So, for example, maybe you have some kind of injury and your VA disability, this is more about future earnings, and your retirement pay is it's earned pay for time served. So if you look at it, it's kind of going in two different directions. The retirement pay, it won't have an effect on the VA disability pay that veterans earn or that they receive. But under the current law, the way things are now, especially the medically retired veterans who would be affected by the Major Richard Starr Act, these veterans have to offset their retirement with their VA disability pay. So to kind of explain that, I'll just use very simple numbers. Let's say that a veteran has earned $1,000 in retirement pay, medical retirement pay or disability retirement pay, and let's say that they're drawing $2,000 in VA disability pay. So that VA disability pay, it offsets everything up to $2,000. So that means anything that the veteran would have earned or has earned through the retirement, they can't receive it. So what the Starr Act does, it removes that red tape and says, hey, you've earned your retirement, here it is. Does that kind of answer your question a little bit?
No, it does. It really clears the mud up, because as you're explaining it, I'm trying to visualize, the numbers that you're putting forth here. And I'm so long story short, you get a title, but not the true recognition of being retired, so to speak, because let's be honest, we put our monies where our mouths are, especially in the United States here. Speaking of Europe, right? If we support something, we pour money into it. I'm not going to bring up hot political points, but I think everybody knows exactly what I'm saying. And of course, it's one of those interesting factors as to, for me, why was this the way it is now? How did it become such a cherry-picking type of situation where you get the title, you go through the process of medical med boarding and medical retirement. You're observed as, X, Y, and Z for combat-related injuries, significant service-related injuries, or however that breaks down. But at the end of the day, the dollars don't match the title, so to speak. And for me, I'm just a little bit curious. How did that become an issue? Was this a prior conversation where we were trying to pinch pennies, as the United States? And so we were like, oh, on this technicality, you have to do the full 20 or else. That's kind of what I'm also hearing. And you're really clearing the mud up on here, because for me, I don't know how people are medically retired full bore. I never went through the process. I can guarantee you it's not an easy one, simply going through, the VA myself and having to deal with the entirety of that bureaucracy. But to get back into it, the kind of the hiccup, how did this come to be? Why was the technicality there? And how does the Major Richard Starr Act fix this problem of of, putting our money where our mouth is for our service members that are medically retired?
Well, I would say one thing that's actually a pretty good talking point about it. So we talk a lot about veterans, and maybe we even tend to overlook those who are currently serving. And as one can probably imagine, any currently serving military member, they probably want to know that, if that bad day comes and they become injured, they probably like that surety that they're going to be taken care of. So that's one thing that the Major Richard Starr Act would do. It gives that sense of security because a lot of these eligible veterans under the Major Richard Starr Act, some of them have injuries that preclude them from holding gainful employment. And I mean, just imagine being able to receive something that you've earned. And I mean, think of the financial stability that can provide. I mean, it's going to be a case-by-case basis, of course, but things like that, I mean, I think that right there is a pretty good draw for the Major Richard Starr Act. And, another talking point I've heard thrown around before is that if we can afford to send, military members to war, well, then we need to be able to afford to take care of them when they return. And I think that this is one of many pieces of legislation that can do that.
That's actually a very powerful, comment there. Not just a talking point, but let it ring out, listeners. If we could send men, women, however they identify, U.S. Navy's got so much stuff going on, and we could send them to war, right? And we are literally on the brink of some really serious circumstances and situations. You didn't hear it from me. I mean, anybody that's paying attention, you can see the warmth in the geopolitical atmosphere, right? If we can afford 20 years of war, of sending people back and forth, to the point of where a lot of the gentlemen and gentleladies that I speak to that are grunts, so to speak, it's back-breaking work. And that's not just the only people that are doing it, but that's the more commonly acknowledged ones. I bring up special forces a lot, amputees a lot, because they are in the forefront. They're the tip of the spear of not only combat, but in this political conversation of, are we doing enough for the veterans that have sacrificed so much? Like we've talked about it before, about the caregiver program and the different things that are going on within that atmosphere, the political atmosphere of nonprofit organizations. But this is one of those things where it seems like I'm not going to be that guy, but it seems like a bean counter came up and was like, "Hey, I got a solution. This technicality, we're gonna prop up this technicality to save us some dimes and dollars moving forward." Now, after the 20 years of war that just concluded, I think this year's is officially recognized. After not such a great pullout, I would say the pullout game of this administration was not strong, but it did happen, right? And we do have to acknowledge that is a great step forward. Ending any kind of warfare period is a great step forward. Now, with this Richard Starr Act, it seems like we're finally actually getting on the same page. It seems like there's a great support both left and right. It seems like a great purple bill or act. And I've discussed this with a few guests about research and different modalities of therapy and medicinal therapies. And the way it comes up is, if we actually want to help the veteran community, we have to actually do the things that lead to sustained support. And like you were saying, being a little bit more financially stable in any kind of atmosphere, but more specifically right now. I'm not trying to bang on anybody's drum on any kind of political supporting atmosphere or aspect here. It's just simple. when things cost more, you need more. Okay, we can't disagree on that. And the way I break down or think about this Major Richard Starr Act is we're going back and fixing something that should have, one, never been a problem, but two, we're doing the right thing accumulatively. The representation is there. Like you were saying, there's support on both left and right. There's no real friction on the agreement there. And that's something that I think is something that's really powerful and good to focus in on, especially given the fact that we have been at war for 20 years. Now, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of opinions, so many opinions out there right now in the world of politics and journalism that a lot of people, like I said earlier, even about the GI Bill, they're just blatantly ignorant on how benefits break down and how they're given out to our veterans and military service members that are currently serving as well. Like our retention rate is horrible. Our recruitment rates on just about every branch is horrible. Don't get me wrong. Everybody's trying their best to advertise and market their branch of service. Like when I was a kid, there was the Marine that, slayed the dragon, or all the Navy SEALs that were, riding in a boat with all the makeup on their face and whatnot, and, getting into a little submarine and then into a bigger submarine. All these TV show commercials was great. One of my favorite movies was Stripes. I don't know if you remember that movie. Do you remember that movie?
Yeah, Stripes.
Yeah.
I think Bill Murray, right? Yeah.
Bill Murray, John Candy. Actually, there's so many great actors in that movie. But the main point was the guy was sitting there and he was like, let's go be an Army. Let's go. Army strong, right? And the process of that, of course, was played out through comedic relief, but it had a very great significance there. I think it's a great talking point where you go into this belief that you're going to be supported, you're going to be trained, you're going to be taken care of, like you said. And I'm not saying that we're falling flat on our face as a society or as a country. What I'm saying is clearly we have room for improvement on just about every angle, given the homelessness rate, given the suicide rate, given the significant financial circumstances, the necessities of nonprofit organizations just to, for some, put food on a plate, or have a house or a roof over their head. Now, this Major Richard Starr Act, when it gets approved, what type of budget do you think this is going to come from? Or do you think this is going to be a bigger argument on Capitol Hill to figure out how to actually get those finances to these service members?
Yeah, so when we talk about the costs associated, the financial costs associated with the Major Richard Starr Act, because it's retirement pay, that's going to come from the Military Retirement Fund. So each branch of the military puts in money towards their individual branches' retirement fund, which is like part of the big one overall. Just to kind of simplify things there a little bit.
No, I didn't know that that's how that was. That's awesome.
Yeah, so some of the estimates that have come out for the Major Richard Starr Act have put the cost of it over the next 10 years maybe somewhere between $7 billion to 10 or 11 billion. However, one of the things that is not commonly going around, or say in the sphere of thought and in discussion, is that a lot of the veterans who already receive combat-related special compensation under the CRSC program, these veterans who are eligible for the Major Richard Starr Act, if they chose to receive their retirement, then they would receive their retirement pay in place of the CRSC pay. And so why is that important? Well, that right there is already a cost saving for anybody who would choose to receive their retirement. And we've crunched the numbers based off of the Department of Defense actuary reports. And over the cost of the Major Richard Starr Act over the course of the next 10 or 11 years, it would probably come out to about $2.9 billion, give or take. And that would probably be if 100% of eligible veterans decided to receive their retirement pay in place of CRSC. So when we talk about the costs associated with it, if we think of this $2.9 billion estimate, the Military Retirement Fund, one way to, let's say, offset the costs of taking care of these veterans, one way could be to use some of the interest that is earned every year in the Military Retirement Fund. And this is a method that doesn't add to the national deficit. It doesn't add to any other budgetary costs, so to speak. So in a weird sense, the Major Richard Starr Act, it could actually be possible to pass and fund without even raising the budget a single penny.
See, and that's very, very important to bring up because you brought up the SCRC, I believe, right? That's what I got the acronym right. Good. And
yeah, CRSC. Yep.
Nice. Now that, what are we talking about? Because is it from the range of $10 to $3,000, or what does that look like comparatively if they were to transfer into the retirement alone? And is it beneficial for the veteran and retiree themselves, or is it just kind of moving one shell to the other shell and, just moving the dollars from where they come a bit?
Ooh. It's a pretty good question. And to kind of maybe give a simplified answer, those kind of decisions are going to be, case by case. Those will be made by individual veterans. So, for example, CRSC, that program, those payments are non-taxable, whereas retirement pay is generally taxable. Then you have other things like divisible assets, for example, if you get divorced. So there's a lot of these other secondary and tertiary considerations. So I would say in terms of veterans impacted by the Major Richard Starr Act, this is going to be one of those things that they'll make the choice on their own, which benefit, say, that they've earned will be better for them, will provide better for them.
Okay, so it's pretty much kind of how the VA is doing their big toxic exposure push, right? With that new act that came out. I can't remember what it's called. Jon Stewart was
the PACT Act.
PACT Act. Thank you so much. Where it's on you to kind of sit down and look at it in a scope of effectiveness and beneficial compensate, or just benefit. What is beneficial for the individual and their own circumstances? Because just because you're eligible doesn't mean this is a good idea for you financially or individually. And now that's something I learned by doing my homework on the PACT Act. Was any time, regardless of if you're 100%, regardless if you're permanent and total, any time that you put in or submit, I should say, for compensation, there's a review process. And in that review process, you then become tangibly you're objectified to the new set of laws and CFR codes and all the ways that they review you and the changes of the vernacular. Like if you're 100% P&T and you open it up, well, they may try to reduce you for something. And that, that's the bureaucratic administration of what is the Veterans Affairs, and there's a lot of complications in it. But having a different resource, on the way out, and you don't know or what works better for you, and you're already getting retired. Now, this is a great step forward if it fits your personal and individual circumstances. So that's really amazing that the talking points are very solid here. We're talking about, investing back into the veterans that either are medically retired due to the severity of war, like, complete amputations and whatnot, or also the types of guys and girls that are medically retired, after the 20 years and still are recognized as being medically injured, and then going for compensation for the VA as they are, I should say, rightly owed. But the word owed, I think, rubs people the wrong way when we're talking about social economics, right? That's what is the Veterans Affairs, and that's what is, a lot of programs in the United States thereof, and just in general. But a lot of it comes down to, well, then how do we do better? How do we have better talking points of recognizing persons that are medically retired, right? I met a gentleman that served about 4 years, and he was able to do the medical retirement route. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't beneficial long-term for him and his family at all due to that concurrency issue. And I was just a little bit set back from it because he did bring up the SRCS, or no. You want to help me out here again?
It's okay. CRSC.
CRSC.
Yeah, combat-related special compensation.
Right, and for him, that was the better financial route. Of course, he didn't really have the option because of the concurrency issues. But now, if he were to go back and receive that retirement, are we also talking about back pay then, or is that been brought up?
No, there will be no back pay. So for legislation like the Major Richard Starr Act, even though I can't recall the specific federal laws, it's kind of barred from retroactive pay. But as the Starr Act is written, once passed, it should take effect the month after its passage. So that earned retirement, et cetera, would begin the next month.
Okay.
So it's a moving forward type of bill.
Nice. And that probably helps tremendously getting it pushed through.
Definitely. Yeah, especially for lawmakers who may be economically conservative, that can kind of ease their concerns. So knowing that there's not going to be a large amount of back pay that's owed right off the bat, knowing that it's a forward-paying piece of legislation, yeah, that can definitely be a good selling point to some lawmakers.
No, it is. It really is, because a lot of the issues, like I keep saying, is I just read something the other day, a journalist that I follow on Twitter, and she's very advocate. She's a big advocate for veterans and Veterans Affairs. Let's get these things right. And she finally sat down and went through the process for applying for benefits through the VA, right? And that could scare a lot of people. I'm not gonna minimize that, but her experience was profound. She did not know that the processes that the individuals go through in order to be appropriately compensated at the rate that their injuries truly are is so difficult and so convoluted, I should say, that it's one of those driving, I'm going to say it's one of those driving issues that really do push veterans to make horrible decisions on a temporary issue, simply because they don't understand that this is a process that I would say the VA is a great organization at creating bureaucracy when it's unnecessary, but that's kind of the gatekeeping responsibilities that a lot of individuals feel they have to do, I guess. I don't know the job descriptions, but I can say through personal experience and after reading this journalist's opinion on the process, I can agree with it profoundly. Is we add a lot more red tape, like you were saying in the beginning, to things that shouldn't be there simply because of the opinion or political atmosphere that veterans receive enough already. And that's kind of a blanket statement, right? Like there was an article a couple months ago or last month that brought into this whole conversation that we need to limit what is recognized. We need to control our expenditure because that's what's responsible. And it came out a little bit harsh on the tongue to the veteran community. I don't know if you ever licked a battery, but I would say this is licking a 12-volt battery, attached to a big old semi-truck, a couple of them in series, because the veteran community reacted very loud. They were like, "Hey, what do you mean? What do you mean, senors, at this committee of opinions, at this journalistic venture we call outdated media?" Those opinions matter simply because they fall on ears of ignorant individuals. And I'm not saying that in a malicious way. I mean that, like, today, I don't know what the Major Richard Starr Act actually does, or how it's funded, or where it's at in this committee or that Senate, or who's pushing it through, or who doctored the bill, who's all of these political conversational points, like, is this person supporting it, or is that person supporting it, or is this group and that pact, and whatever and whatnot. It falls to the conversation of what does the individual see and what are they actually able to do, right? Like you're bringing up, after approval, it'll take 1 month and then it hits. And that's a really great process. That's a really great thing. That's a great outcome, because unlike a lot of other things that veterans go through, I could bring up the caregiver program every day, all day, is this constant reevaluation and scrutiny of severity of your injuries as if you can regrow limbs. I'm like surprised by a lot of the conversations I overhear, just kind of, being the type of guy I am, I interject appropriately, not necessarily when I want to. And that's a behavioral trait that I think most veterans have, but a lot of them choose not to express, especially when, I hate this word triggered, but respectively, truthfully so. When somebody says your military service or your sacrifice or your buddy's sacrifice or, whomever it is financially creating an uncomfortable circumstance. And I'm like, well, like we said before in this conversation, if you can afford to send them, you need to be able to afford to take care of them when they get home, in any regards of where that person's at in their life. A lot of great talking points today. I'm trying to focus on, of course, the Major Richard Starr Act, and yourself, Stephen London here. How do we get involved in, one, advocating, and two, promoting or sharing this information?
Yeah, definitely. Really, really great question. So to get involved, there's a lot of different ways. Maybe one of the most simple ways to get involved, you can just hop on the internet, go to Google, go to Bing, whatever your search browser is, and type in Major Richard Starr Act. And you'll see links to Facebook pages where groups of people are advocating. You'll see links to websites for the veteran service organizations that are advocating. There's a lot of these different email, phone call campaigns. And maybe just kind of simply put, one of the greatest ways to advocate is to hold that dialogue with lawmakers and their staffers, and to keep it concise and polite. And, I think that that's a big part of the reason that the Major Richard Starr Act is the #1 most co-sponsored piece of legislation this session of Congress. And you can reach out to lawmakers, their staffers, other ways of doing it as well. Maybe reach out to veteran friends if you have any veteran friends. You can also reach out to media. One thing I tell people is that sometimes media have different methods or assets available to them to be able to get answers, to be able to contact lawmakers in their offices, see why they haven't co-sponsored. And even though you said earlier it's not one of your favorite words, but triggered, having these conversations, these polite conversations with lawmakers and their staffs, you can actually learn and maybe even understand some of the trigger points for these lawmakers. What would get them to support? What keeps them from supporting, et cetera. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways that you can just, I guess, start off by Googling Major Richard Starr Act and, take a look at some of those websites and Facebook pages that populate.
Nice. That's awesome because it's very pragmatic in its approach here. It's simple. Speak up. Like everybody who I'm hinting to, of course, that article that sparked a lot of debate on social media. I mean, you'd have to practically be living under a rock to not know what I'm talking about. Veterans came out in full support and full dialogue. They were calling, and maybe they weren't so polite, like you say, eloquently spoken, right? But yeah. It was a reaction that I was inspired by. Like, it was one of those things I was like, man, I always talk about these veterans issues and being a podcaster, I have to focus on both good and bad. I have to play devil's advocate. I have to, journalistically speaking, play to the left and the right to get the story out right. I don't mean right. I mean just the pragmatic best way I can, right? And it was very difficult because as we were talking about triggering points, it was very difficult having a positive vision or outlook, reaching out to individuals. But when you finally do reach out to these individuals, like congressional representatives, even district representatives, or even smaller, mayoral council representatives, what we're seeing in the United States is we're fundamentally beginning to understand our key role as citizens in the United States and our obligation to discuss these key issues aloud. So that's great advice. Be polite. Don't be that, I'm not saying college educated, left-leaning individual that's screaming at the top of their lungs just for attention. Come with articulatable facts. Articulate that, put the facts out there. Have the conversation. This is the current circumstance. This is the way we can do better. This is the opinion of those who served that you are serving now. And here's the obligation of that oath and service and responsibility, both as individuals and as representations or representatives, right? It's very important because I fell into that very, very, very bad for a very long time, especially at the beginning of the viral shift in our planet, right? And that was pre-2000, I'd say 2020, just between 2019 and 2020. It was a very difficult time to believe that anybody would want to listen to anybody else about anything. And coming out of it, here now 3 years later, what I'm seeing a lot more is we kind of have to get dirty and get into the mud and make a mess of it. Let those emotions out. They call it cathartic release, right? And let's ascertain a better modality of collectively speaking on our opinions. There's so many things in the planet right now that are going on. Of course, as a parent, as a husband, that I would love to be a part of, but I can't be happier to be a part of more than the veteran community. Simply put, it's because I do believe that through advocating for each other, having these conversations, what works, what doesn't, is it waking up at 4:00 in the morning and exercising like Mark Wahlberg, or, Tim Kennedy or Jocko Willink. No, okay, not for everybody. Not for me. I tried it. It's exhausting. I'd fall apart immediately. But that's because, that's who I am. That's where I'm at. But equally spoken, maybe it does work for other people. So, of course, I'll speak up on it. Of course, I'll be like, hey, yeah, try that hormone replacement therapy stuff. Pay out of pocket for some therapy. Go to Mexico. Try psychedelics. Do what you can now to help yourself in the future. Carl Munger and I discussed that a lot at length, was preparing for the future and for the long term, and understanding what that means is very important as individuals right now. I think more so than ever, because we don't want to repeat the mistakes that we have been seeing. It costs a lot. And the cost that I can say personally are the lives of veterans that don't understand the process, but also the barriers that representatives and advocates or nonprofits or, gatekeepers put up to scrutinize or validate a lot of the veteran community. And I go, here's another thing with this Major Richard Starr Act. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be simple. And I guarantee you it's going to cause a lot of gruff in people's lives. This is a thing, this is what's going on, here's a percentage of eligible persons who are actually applying, and here's the approval rates. And I guarantee you, much like how the current VA operates, there's going to be a lot of interpretation and a lot of vernacular that's going to be pushed around by non-veterans and, quite frankly, naive persons that are in either political houses or houses of influence that will break down the law that comes forth out of the act. And after the CFR codes are written and the opinions are heard, without that voice, we're literally leaving it up on the table for persons that have committees and, nonprofit organizations that chair positions over oversight committees. And what that influence and affluence provides is their opinions on how you should live. And I don't feel like that's appropriate any longer. I feel like as a veteran that has seen so many great friends go through this tumultuous path of receiving adequate recognition, titles, or even compensation, it degrades the sensation of service. And yes, we all volunteered. That doesn't mean you remove your human rights or your human complexities of emotion. That's impossible. We're not robots, right? But that is time over fist, hand over fist, time over time. Let me get my sayings right. What we see as, persons of service and trying to reintegrate into society, into the civilian world. I don't know how it is over there where you're at. Of course, I don't know geopolitically how individuals view veterans or military service members, even within, their own governments, but others, right? But I do feel as though the times that we've seen ourselves, our communities be, let's just say, vulgarly toxic, right? I think the times are shifting where we're getting out of the time of, wanting to just shy away from it, shutting up and just hiding it or reclusing into the corners of society to be nothing more than a body in the air or fart in the wind, right? But we are now standing out as a community and in leadership roles. There's a lot of leaders in Congress right now that have prior military experience. And I'm not saying everybody's on all agreement on everything, but there's a lot more conversations happening due to that. So for yourself, Stephen, I'd really like to say, man, I'm so stoked to learn more about the Major Richard Starr Act. And if there's any more words that you can add to the conversation, this would be the time.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess kind of to maybe wrap it up a little bit, kind of a call to action to kind of, inspire people to kind of, take data-driven stuff and humanize it. the Major Richard Starr Act, it's set to improve the lives of about 50,000 veterans. And it goes even beyond those veterans. It goes to their families, their communities, towards, young men and women that will potentially meet with these veterans prior to, even enlisting or commissioning into the military service. So the secondary and tertiary effects of the Major Richard Starr Act, they're numerous. And these veterans that would be affected by this legislation, they can really use everybody's help, everybody's voice in a unified effort to advocate for this must-pass and long overdue legislation. And I guess I can probably wrap it up about there for the Major Richard Starr Act. And I'm really glad to have the opportunity to join you on your podcast.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I really do. It's something that, like I was saying earlier, it's very important coming from another mouth, right? I think our listeners know I have opinions, right? And it's just, I don't like being in an echo chamber. I don't want to be, Tucker Carlson or Don Lemon that, I'm just regurgitating the status quo, right? But at the same time, there's a responsibility for conversation where we have to have the opinions of those most important to us, like my community, right? Being a veteran is very important to me. The veteran community is very important to me. And seeing the degradation of not just homelessness and suicide and trial and errors of medications and, the side effects of those medications and modalities of therapy, but to look at it as a full person, right? An actual person. And we used to call it the home health method, okay? Where you go in to see the same doctor, you go in and see the same corpsman, you go in to see the same nurse, etc. And there's this rapport established, I should say. There's a rapport, there's an understanding, there's a viable, safe line of communication, and it's another word, safe space, I don't like using, but it's very actually important. That's something I do take from, the liberal concepts of existence is people do need to feel safe or they're not going to reach out, right? They're not going to speak up. They're not going to feel as though I can't. How do I reach out to a senator or congressman when I'm in my muck, right? Like just stuck in it, down in a hole. Well, that's part of it. That's part of the fear-based limitations and reactions of conditions that people have. And that's okay. You're allowed to feel that way. In fact, it's fucking normal to feel that way. I do believe that's the first F-bomb I dropped this entire show, which is rare. I usually drop a lot more, but I just really want to pointiate the fact that it's okay to feel afraid to reach out to these people. It's okay to also not have 100% of the facts straight. But if you can get out some key talking points like we have today with Steven, which I'm just super appreciative of your time and your information, but the key talking points, this won't increase the budget. This already is pretty much well established. Nobody's arguing that they don't want it. Here's the amount of people it'll help, and this is how it will help them. That's very basic stuff. And I think the more and more we simplify, like you've done repeatedly for me, which I appreciate, simplifying these complex questions and emotions we may feel with pragmatic approach and things that will actually affect people's wallet. Because as a human being, I know firsthand, the moment your wallet thins out is where your stress is going to skyrocket. Now, that's not the only factor in this existence, of course. There's family and friends and etc. But you brought it up very well. This is a secondary and tertiary effect type of act that we haven't really put forth much effort in before. Changing the not just the title of a person, but recognizing their sacrifices financially is a way that I feel people understand and are incentivized to perform. And here's the carrot on the stick. Look at how the majority of leadership handles their day-to-day life, right? Unless it's making money, they don't pay attention to it. Okay? Let's be honest. All the politicians out there and all these bills and all the acts in the world, unless it finances their reelection, which, yes, by supporting that, that's how that works, they don't necessarily have a good understanding or vision on it. There's not a line of sight on a lot of these issues simply because of normative practices within politics. Now, that's another conversation for another time that I feel like we could have, but I'm so grateful for your time and information, Stephen. And if there's any ways that we could advocate and support both yourself and the Major Richard Starr Act, I will post and do all that I can, resharing the information. And to wrap it up on that note, we do appreciate the fact that you're staying up late probably, and you got a whole life going on, where you're at. But to do this and to speak up for our brothers and sisters in the military and veterans, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. I truly appreciate it. I'm humbled by getting this information and being able to provide that to our listeners.
Well, thank you very much as well. And I guess as an end note for this, I just want to say it's an honor and a privilege to advocate for legislation like the Major Richard Starr Act.